All right, welcome. So today we are tackling a massive and honestly kind of chaotic roster of prehistoric creatures. We're going on this mind-bending journey of extreme biological scale to really grasp the awe-inspiring differences between the tiny, tiny babies of the prehistoric world and their towering adult counterparts. It's a super thrilling look at how these animals went from just vulnerable little hatchlings into the literal titans that ruled the earth. But hey, before we get to the actual giants, we absolutely have to address the elephant, or I guess the boo-grooner, in the room. Because our source material today relies on some raw, unedited auto captions. Right out the gate, we are greeted with some incredibly hilarious transcription anomalies. I mean, we're talking quotes like, iguana hushi, cynotherium him, boo-grooner look ursus. Yes, that is actual data from the transcript. No way around it. So as we decipher this massive roster of prehistoric life, we're also kind of playing detective, right? We're translating these wild AI-generated phonetic guesses back into the terrifying and majestic creatures they were actually meant to represent.
Okay, let's dive into this. Honestly, wait, what did that say? Is literally the question you'll be asking yourself a few times today. But beyond all these funny little data quirks, we really do have a monumental task ahead of us. We're going to take this wildly garbled, massive list of names and actually categorize them. And by structuring this data, we can uncover the true narrative hidden within the source material, the absolutely incredible biological journey these animals undertook.
Starting us off, Section 1, the prehistoric scale problem.
The entire core premise of our journey today is this idea of the impossible growth spurt. You see, every single creature on our list, no matter how terrifying, how heavily armored, or just how unbelievably large it eventually became, well, it started out as a tiny hatchling or a highly vulnerable baby. The whole overarching theme of our source is visualizing that impossible growth. Just think about the sheer scale of surviving and growing from a creature that could literally fit inside your bathtub to an animal that rivals a multi-story building. It's wild.
Moving right along, Section 2, the massive sauropods.
So, looking at the absolute largest animals in our source, we have the long necks. We're talking Apatosaurus, Argentinosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, and the very creatively spelled Camarasaurus. This group contains some of the most famous towering titans of the prehistoric world. And when we talk about size comparison, wow, this is where the contrast is the most extreme. Imagine a baby Argentinosaurus or Brontosaurus just hatching from an egg. It's incredibly small, yet through years of just constant eating and surviving against all odds, that tiny baby scales up into a walking mountain. It is a biological marvel that these specific animals achieved such impossible sizes.
Next up, Section 3, predators, theropods, and carnivores.
Shifting our focus from those gentle giants to the apex predators, we have the absolute heavy hitters hiding in our raw dataset. Acrocanthosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, Spinosaurus, Tarbosaurus, Torvosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, and Velociraptor. And you know what's so fascinating here? It's the sheer size diversity just within this one predator group. You have the massive, terrifying Tyrannosaurus and Spinosaurus on one end, and then you have the much smaller, super agile Velociraptor on the other. Yet that rule of scale applies to every single one of them. A baby Tyrannosaurus had to survive long enough in a world absolutely packed with other hungry predators to eventually become the massive adult ruler of its ecosystem.
Now, we also have to briefly highlight some of the more uniquely transcribed names that just add to the sheer diversity of our prehistoric kingdom roster. We managed to uncover Oviraptor alongside Dinochirus, which honestly is a fantastic phonetic capturing of Dinochirus, a massive, totally bizarre theropod. It really highlights how incredibly diverse the carnivore and omnivore groups were, and, how tricky it can be to decipher these unbelievable creatures from phonetic audio data.
All right, Section 4, horns, spikes, and armor.
For these plant eaters, the best defense was a purely physical defense. And this brilliantly illustrates how survival tactics evolved. We can split these animals into two distinct categories. First, the horned and frilled group, featuring Triceratops, Protoceratops, Styracosaurus, and Pachyrhinosaurus. And second, the armored and spiked group, featuring Stegosaurus and Skeletosaurus. The logic here is simple but profound when you keep in mind our overarching theme of babies versus adults. See, a baby Triceratops or a baby Stegosaurus wasn't born with massive hardened horns or gigantic defensive backplates, not at all. They had to survive long enough as soft, highly vulnerable babies to actually grow those massive physical defenses over time.
The heavily armored adult forms we know and love, those are the result of years of dramatic physical scaling. And yes, our trusty auto captions totally struck again in this category. We managed to decipher this Ceteratops, which is just an amazing attempt at something like Zuniceratops, or maybe just a generic ceratopsian, and Pachycephalosaurus, a delightful mangling of Pachycephalosaurus. It's a great reminder that while the biology of these creatures is absolutely serious business, the data we use to study them can sometimes provide a much-needed laugh.
On to Section 5, the rise of mammals. Now, what's really interesting about this data split is that when we shift the timeline to an entirely different era, we find the vast majority of our source material is overwhelmingly dedicated to dinosaurs. However, there is a distinct, fascinating portion focused entirely on mammals that ruled the Earth much later. It shows us that the prehistoric kingdom timeline doesn't just stop at the meteor. It actually carries right on to a handful of creatures that thrived in a completely different world.
Here is that small but really fascinating group of Ice Age mammals pulled directly from the very end of the text. We have cave lions, the iconic Smilodon, or Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, the majestic Megaloceros, and, drumroll please, my personal favorite quirk of the entire explainer, the leaner mammoth, which we can safely assume is the woolly mammoth. Even though they're mammals and separated by literally millions of years from the dinosaurs, the exact same principle of the source material applies to them. A baby leaner mammoth had to navigate a freezing, dangerous world, growing incredibly rapidly to achieve the massive, towering adult size needed to survive the Ice Age.
Bringing it all home, Section 6, a matter of scale.
Pulling everything we've analyzed together, whether we're talking about long necks, terrifying carnivores, walking armored tanks, or a mammoth, it really all comes down to the micro versus the macro. Vulnerable beginnings versus prehistoric kingdom rulers. Our source material challenges us to look past the impressive adult forms and remember the complete journey. To survive the prehistoric world meant undergoing an unbelievable physical transformation, from a tiny egg or a small, completely helpless mammalian birth to becoming a massive ruler of the ecosystem. It is the ultimate story of prehistoric survival, and it's perfectly captured by comparing these babies to their adult counterparts. And that leaves us with one final thought based on the incredible roster we've just organized. Think about the massive Argentinosaurus, the heavily armored Triceratops, or even that towering mammoth. From tiny hatchlings to towering titans, which of these giants do you think underwent the most impossible growth spurt? It's a question that really makes you appreciate the sheer, unbelievable scale of prehistoric life. Thanks for joining me to decipher this data, and definitely keep exploring.